Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle, explorer with National Geographic, founder of Mission Blue, and an ocean elder.
This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. And I'm going to try to share my screen. As usual, this is the most wonderful and interesting part.
Oh, technology.
Right?
Yes.
Drag this across.
So smooth. There we go.
Huh.
I love this picture. It's the reminder that
the world is blue.
Blue. Yes. We need some green stuff too, but without the blue.
But it is mostly blue. What do you always say? No blue, no green.
Yeah,
exactly. So as we get through the program today, you can put your questions in the Q&A box, and we're going to get to as many as we can towards the end of the program. And before we get underway, we've talked about in the past on episodes we've had aquanauts, talking about people living underwater and spending time on the reef, and really using this immersive experience to get to know the locals.
Submersive experience. Yeah. No, gaining the gift of time on location, whether it's underwater in a desert or high in the treetops. These short visits are helpful, but the gift of time, getting to see the forests and the sea. I mean, like our guest today, Meg Lowman, I am a botanist at heart, and I spent much of my time in the sea studying the forests of kelp, the seagrass meadows, the mangroves, and especially the microforests that really do much of the heavy lifting in terms of generating oxygen, capturing carbon. But we're going to hear a lot more about that from the terrestrial botanist, Meg Lowman.
And there she is. We're excited to have you today, Meg. If you can turn on your camera and video.
Hey, thank you, Sylvia.
It's so great to have you here today.
Yeah, welcome on board.
Well, it's an honor, of course, Her Deepness.
Your Highness.
Too much fun.
So that's what Ed Wilson refers to you as, Her Highness.
Exactly. And I guess, did he give you your nickname or did someone else?
Oh, well, it's kind of caught on here and there, but so has Her Highness, Meg Lowman, the arbornaut.
The arbornaut.
Well, we each are at the extreme ends of the planet, aren't we? In some ways, it's great.
We have our ups and downs. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Terrible.
Well, let's go out on a limb and talk about it.
Okay. Well, here's your book. We're going to talk about this, among other things. This is just still sizzling from the press.
Oh,
I'm
right.
pleased to have had a little opportunity to salute you for what you're doing to make people aware of how important taking care of nature with the forests and the small, medium, and large forests. You have a number of other books that you produced over the years. Do you have any to show us?
A couple. And first, a big shout out to you, Sylvia, for writing the foreword to the Arbornaut, which really sets the stage for women explorers and maybe all the crazy things that you and I have done in our lives. But a few beforehand, I did write Life in the Treetops some years back, which kind of was a way of exposing taking my children to work with me. There's Eddie in the Canopy with me, and Bob Ballard actually wrote that forward because we had worked together quite a while on the Jason project. And then I actually roped my kids into writing a book with me because their journals for all of the research trips that they went on with mom were much more interesting than mine. They would say, like, our mom is so crazy. She's up there collecting poop, insect poop in the treetops, or something really frank. And of course, Yale University loved to publish that part of the book.
Of course.
Every little kid should have one.
Yeah.
Of all ages.
Exactly. But I always think it's great to be a field biologist because you can take your kids to work. So maybe there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, I
Here,
think
here.
we've experienced that for sure.
Yeah, here's one.
Yeah.
Go Liz.
Yeah. Yeah. I was sent out to play with the sharks as a kid. Yeah. Yeah. I'm getting my work done and pressing the plants. Go play with the nurse sharks.
There you go. That's
Keep them
great.
entertained.
Oh,
But really, your careers literally span decades of applying that sort of immersive science, but to the treetops.
Mhm.
And the idea of kind of spending time aloft in the forest is just, I mean, I think every little kid wants to climb trees, right?
I
We
think
have
so.
to-
Well, I guess it's our, evolutionary history, isn't it? That somewhere in the interstices of our brain is this ability to climb trees. So
Yeah.
I have to count my blessings. I'm sure you do too, Sylvia, that we each do science that is of interest to kids, because I view that as part of my job, trying to get the next generation inspired.
No,
Mhm.
no kidding. Yeah.
And even in our own backyard here, we have a bunch of these big redwood trees, and
The
I'm
little redwood trees.
yeah, they're
getting
really
there.
like the kind of redwood twigs, I guess. But I keep watching and waiting, and I'm even more inspired to kind of create a little walkway between them.
I think so. It looks like a good opportunity. They're beautiful.
Yeah, the squirrels run around in them, and the blue jays and the hawks and everybody, and I'm just
Ravens.
the
Yeah.
ravens.
Mm.
So you really want to get up there where the action is.
Nice to see your backyard. That's great.
Yeah. But I really want to talk about kapok trees.
Okay.
So,
Love them.
so this one, I mean, as a kid in Florida, you see the weirdest things, right? You think there's lots of species that don't really belong there, but they show up, and some of them are really big, and some of them are kind of stealthy. But the kapok tree, this is one that
It's an old giant.
it's an old giant, and I mean, it's still there today. But for decades, it was sort of the namesake of this really kind of strange tourist trap attraction. It was called the Kapok Tree Inn and Gardens
And restaurant.
and
Yeah.
restaurant, and that beautiful tree, it's still there today. But
That is neat. Well, it's a fantastic tree. I do highlight it in my book a bit because it's very medicinal. It's the emergent tree, as they call it in the Amazon, meaning it goes above the canopy of other trees. So it's a great sentinel position to look down on the canopy of the rest. And I guess you read the book and found out that I had to ask permission of a shaman in order to climb one of the tallest trees. And when
Well,
she gave permission, and that's unusual to be a she shaman, we
right,
immediately got right up the tree. I think we were being blessed by the plant gods that Sylvia and I worship as botanists. But it is a fantastic tree, and so much life up there. Maybe not so much in Tampa because there aren't too many native species to where the K-pop comes from, but it's still a gorgeous structure, isn't it? It does make you want to climb trees just to look at that.
yeah, I mean, it's just so gorgeous, and then to think about all those, it's almost like a sky reef, right? You've got all those nooks and crannies of little pockets in the limbs and branches,
Right.
and where it's supposed to be in the rainforest.
Oh.
It would seem that you'd see all kinds of orchids and bromeliads and all the little guys that then live down inside of those, the tree frogs and everything else.
No. Unfortunately, the stature has also been its demise because they stick up above the rest. The loggers go hunting after them first. They see it from the Amazon. The barge is there with all the logging equipment, and they just dash out and get those trees first because they do have fabulous timber. But it's a heartbreak that they are now pretty rare in their native habitat.
It is so sad. And
Just as whales are beginning to be appreciated, worth more alive than dead,
mhm.
big old trees,
Right, quite a
Mhm.
parallel
Treated-
there.
they have to be treated as sacred.
Right. I tell people, and of course I live in Florida, we have to look after our senior citizens. You certainly don't want to just cut all of them down when they
Yeah.
hit a certain age, please.
Well, of the native trees in Florida, I always think about the cypress,
Right. Oh
and
my goodness.
and they're just so beautiful. And I remember, planting, wading out into the water and planting cypress trees, and then watching them eventually kind of stick up these knees and things like that. And they're so incredible when you finally get into an area where the old growth ones are.
Right.
Yeah, beautiful.
Like being in a cathedral.
Right, absolutely. I do in the end of my book, focus a lot on saving big trees. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, Sylvia, that Jane Goodall and I just wrote an op-ed on saving big trees, because it's easy to get caught up in this replanting thing, taking an empty field and planting, but no monkeys or koalas can live in those little seedlings for probably 100 or 200 years. So we're barking up the wrong tree or whatever it is, to think that we can replace a seedling with a big tree. And we've just got to get smarter about that, because it's the life in the tree. It's not just the tree itself that counts.
Right.
It's the same as with the coral reef. It's not just about the coral.
Right.
It's the system. And replanting bits and twigs of coral, it's a good thing to do, but it's no substitute for saving old growth systems, natural systems that are intact. There's so many parallels between common sense actions that we need to take on the land. We've clear cut so much of the land and replaced where forests have been, and other vegetation too, with our own structures, our own purposes.
Pavement.
Yeah.
And you think, just again, looking at this tree, it's got like a lot of, mowed lawn around it and so forth. But you really think about when the trees are allowed to kind of go through their whole cycle, and they drop their leaves, and it's that nourishment cycle,
it's a carbon cycle,
and
nitrogen cycle,
and all the microbes that live down in the soil. And
absolutely,
it's just an incredible array of life.
Well, it was climbing trees that led a handful of us to figure out that half the biodiversity in the land part of the world lives in the tops of trees. And fancy that foresters overlooked that for generations, because they walked around on the forest floor looking at the bottom of the tree, obviously eyeballing the timber.
Oh yeah. And it's like, it's just like, so often people focus just on the surface of the ocean. They see it as a nice, they enjoy the sunset. They go sailing or paddling, something like that, but
oblivious to
oblivious and to your
what's below,
and
hear what's above.
Yeah. And then and you parallel in the book saying that people go and into the forest, and it's almost like a doctor looking at only the big toe of the patient and ignoring the rest of the body, and trying to assess like what's going on here, and you're kind of looking at that big toe and failing to kind of really look up and seeing the the abundance above.
Yeah, it is amazing. I call it hit you over the head science. I'm not a genius, but it's kind of like nobody looked at the whole tree. And I'm sure Sylvia has parallels in the ocean where we were so content to look at a little tiny bit of it and think that was the whole picture.
Yeah. Or just looking at a tree that's been cut down versus the tree while it's standing.
Right. And understand how important they are. I mean, I don't know why. I really do think we're at a critical time, Meg. I think it's reflected in your book and in your research and all of it, that now we know, we understand what could not be understood before. We've got more of an overview and putting the pieces together and see how Earth is one single interacting system. And we have taken and altered so much of it. We still have a chance, but that chance is slipping away.
It sure is.
This is first time we've been able to really see the world in context, and maybe the very last moment in time when we can actually take the 5% old growth forest and use that as the basis for restoring.
Right. Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I really applaud what you're doing to put the light on why these trees are systems and why it matters. I mean, it's ethically and morally right thing to do, but even selfishly, we need those trees. We need those systems.
We sure do. And I was very honored that Macmillan, or for Strauss and Giroux, or Macmillan, published my book, as I'm sure you are with all your books, because we need people besides scientists to read our work, Sylvia. We need businessmen and
kids,
heads of schools and institutional people that, and of course, government officials, but we can't just pour money to governments of Brazil and other places. We haven't had that much success. We need influential people to understand the importance of nature. And I hope they can do it really quickly within this generation.
I do too. And this is another little tree from our yard. It doesn't really belong in California. It's an Australian tree.
It's a special tree.
It's special.
It's a rescue tree.
It's a rescue tree. It's a It's the
Wilmaria,
Wilmaria, and
a rare one just recently discovered, and so in a
You
sense,
got one of the, where did you buy that? Did you get it at one of the?
National Geographic.
Okay. Because I think the botanical garden occasionally sells those for fundraisers too.
yeah, I was so
Maybe
excited
one
to see it actually produce male and female cones, and now I'm trying to figure out, okay, now what do I do? I get
watch out, we don't want it to become invasive, but it looks
No.
wonderful and we need a few more of them. So that's
Yeah,
really
it's like a living
It's
fossil.
amazing we can still discover new plants. Harder to discover than insects perhaps, but they're out there, and
Yeah.
that's a great example.
And we, and we're just,
Something dropped on my head. That's the
Yeah.
problem with being in the understory. You never know what might fall from the top.
it might fall from the top, but this is what people, usually when they're thinking about, what's up in the trees, they think that it's a mammal, it's a bird, these are the animals we typically think about that are, up in the tops of the trees. And it's usually, these smaller dudes, and people are, this is like the question that always comes up, like, what's eating my leaves?
Exactly. Most gardeners want me to come and squish their insects, and I go and celebrate their insects. But it's funny, when I am a botanist at heart, like you, Sylvia, and when I first started my research, I wanted to know how long leaves lasted, what were the dynamics in the canopy, because this essential building block of life was really unknown in the tropics. But lo and behold, everything kept eating my samples, and even the numbers I had on the samples. And so that got me curious. I had to become a very quick study as an entomologist. And it was pretty extraordinary because all these brilliant, colorful things live in the canopy, and they're pollinating and feeding and reproducing and flying and dying. And, most of them never see the forest floor. So it's quite extraordinary.
And spiders too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a whole food chain.
Oh, it's fabulous. Yeah, it
And
is.
birds eating the insects.
Mhm.
And everybody poops, as you point out.
Right.
adding nutrients back into the system.
Totally true.
And you had the one experience of kind of being suspended by a series of ropes, and then having a bird attack the rope, believing it was a snake.
That's right. Oh, that was one of my few dangerous moments. It is funny. And I take a lot of volunteers now too to help me look for the insects and leaves. As you can imagine, this surface of a few million leaves per tree is quite hard to find those predators. But I take volunteers, which we call citizen scientists, and they always come home and say, I'll never look at leaves the same again. And we, of course, call them holy leaves, but they develop this sense of worship for these insects that eat the leaves. It's kind of fun to have all these leaf chokes circulating around the world.
Understanding that this is an essential process. It's the nutrient cycle in action.
Absolutely.
So many organisms cannot access the energy that's contained in the leaves, but they can access the insects that eat the leaves. And it's like plankton in the ocean.
Right.
And fish don't get to the micro phytoplankton. There's no way that they can utilize it, but they can eat the shrimp, the krill, or the little fish that can filter out the phytoplankton. And we need the insects as the middlemen.
Absolutely. As Ed Wilson says, the glue that holds the world together.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And it's shocking the amount of biodiversity that has been lost just
Already.
through in the ocean from
Absolutely.
trawling and overfishing, and then of course on the land by the
Poisons and clear
Right.
cutting.
cutting, and then of course all the insecticides. And
Yeah. So kids always ask me, well, how do you know half the biodiversity lives in the canopy? And I explain to them about this business of extrapolation, that you can count all the insects in one tree, say, and then you multiply by different species. And we've come up with this mathematics. And of course, the other side of the coin is we also estimate that of that 50% of those species, less than 10% has ever been classified or calculated by human eyes. So it's this extraordinary understudied part of the world right above our heads.
Right.
yeah,
Difficult to get to as your undersea, deep sea places, but within a couple 100 feet of the surface of the earth is this whole unknown, as I call it, the eighth continent, which is part of the title of my book.
The other little guys.
Okay, so we have to talk about we have to talk about these little dudes because
They're
you
so
know
cute.
they're tiny and they're durable. They're just amazing creatures, and they exist up in the forest canopy too.
Well, you've become, well, a noted zoologist for your discoveries of the critters that live on your beloved
By
tree.
default, all right, I had to go on all these dog legs, no pun intended, from away from the leaves to figure out all the dynamics up there. But this is one of my favorite. The water bear tardigrada is its own phylum, which is so cool. And mostly when I lecture to fifth graders, they all know what they are. But if I lecture to businessmen, they've never heard of such a thing in their lives.
What is that?
Even though
I
it's
was
really
super
common.
excited. I was super excited to find some of these in our bird bath one year. And I was looking under the microscope and I'm like, oh my God, it's a tardigrade.
That is so great. Well, they are pretty wondrous. And what's amazing is, again, one of my chapters is about redwoods, and I had a National Science Foundation grant for wheelchair bound students because they're one of the groups that are very excluded from science, almost even more than girls or some of the minorities. And the minute you have a physical disability, people say you have to stay inside.
No, I know, it's just terrible.
Yeah, you
You
can't.
know, and so these kids learn to climb because we developed a couple methods, and we thought, my partner and I, that in this project said, what could they discover? Like, not just rediscover, but water bears is a fabulous thing where nobody really ever looked at them in forest canopies. So these kids found new species, published papers, and became little scientists in their early college years, which was great. So we had a lot of fun with the water bears as our kind of opportunity to give some of these underserved kids a better sort of help in developing their scientific prowess.
I love it that you're a water bear expert,
Yeah.
along with other things.
I'm waiting to go to outer space and take some with me. I know they've already been in space and they've reproduced in space, but I don't think anybody's taken them and performed experiments. If I could talk to Elon Musk, maybe he would invite me.
But they're
Well,
fabulous animals.
can you provide, for those who are listening, some idea of the scale?
Sure. So this probably 20 of those would fit on your little tiny fingernail, my little fingernail, which is smaller than maybe some of the audience, but they are for the most part only visible through a microscope. Sometimes you can see what looks like a dot of pollen in a little bowl of water, but they only live in liquid medium. They love drops of water on leaves. They love drops of water in moss or soil or tree trunks. And they have the ability to go into this amazing ball and kind of just hibernate when it's dry. And so that's a really wonderful opportunity. And they can also travel in these light, little tiny balls and move to the next forest or wait for water to come. And so they have they are, according to Animal Planet TV, the extremophiles of the planet, meaning they can live at the bottom of hot springs, in Antarctic ice and all kinds of places, but they just need that little bit of water. But the crazy thing is when we sample for them, probably like your plankton, Sylvia, we can't see them. We bring the samples back to the lab, we scan them with the microscope, and I think in something like, gosh, 46,000 out of 47,000 collections, we always had a water bear in our samples from the canopy. They're just everywhere.
I love it.
It's so amazing. You think of like, how do they get up there to begin with? And
Boy, isn't that cool?
yeah, they are super cool.
Well, they've been around for a long time, for one thing. We're newcomers. We seem to forget this measure of time, how long other forms of life have existed and how recently we have come and really cut big swaths out of the natural world.
Yeah, for
On
sure.
our watch, in our lifetime, some of the greatest damage has been done.
Absolutely.
This is just from a recent trip that you had to.
Haiti and Dominican Republic. I mean,
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, I'm afraid there's so many of those aerial views now, and this is just one of the many, but it's really shocking and so disappointing. On the one hand, we have some great technology to look at deforestation, to look at canopy dynamics like flowering trees with drones and with LiDAR and aerial imagery. But, one of the primary uses is to find everything after the fact. We can detect toxins in the water. We can detect illegal logging and poaching, but gosh, we need to be doing something before the actions happen. And that's where I think humans still fall short.
Definitely. And you look at an image like this and just think of, the damage that's been done, the biodiversity lost.
Right.
And yet it's still just considered sort of economic progress or,
They call it-
development progress.
They call it development.
Yeah, they call it development progress. And
It's a great picture to say, you know what, planting 1 million seedlings on that property will not restore that land. If you
not at
think
all.
the environment under that green canopy versus the environment in that bleached, hot, dry soil, you can appreciate that seedlings won't have a chance unless you develop a very, very thorough irrigation system and protection from rabbits or whatever might be there to eat vegetation. It's just a crazy dream, I think, to be able to restore a rainforest in any kind of short order.
Right.
So I took this picture from an airplane, but now through Google Earth, it's possible to survey the world and see things that were not seeable. They're opened the eyes of so many people to how much has been lost. Driving down a highway, you might miss the extent of what's been lost. One of the Google experts, Rebecca Moore, relates how the mountaintops in West Virginia, the clear cutting for mining was exposed, and how clear cutting of redwoods in California illegally, the loggers intruding into places that were supposed to be protected. And when Google Earth was used as evidence, the loggers and the miners said it's not fair. It's not fair to use Google.
Gosh,
Absolutely is. One of the things that is quite fairness is that in many areas where they do these large clear cuts, they actually leave the trees intact as a buffer along the roadways where people
Right.
so they still think that everything's great, the forest looks good, there's these beautiful trees, and just on the other side,
Yeah,
Right.
devastation.
Australia was famous for that in the 70s when I was working there. It was so disheartening because most people just never looked past that little thin layer of green.
Yeah.
So they had a level of comfort, but oh my gosh, so
And
disappointing.
it's not just that it ruins the soil, but it changes like the entire weather around the area.
Yeah, of course it
Right.
does.
And in the last chapter of my book, I do talk about what can people do. It's so disheartening to see a picture like this. And unfortunately, or fortunately, most of this logging, especially in the Amazon and a lot in the Congo, and especially in Malaysia and Indonesia, is because of American consumers. The Western world is buying palm oil or timber or soy or beef. We are in control of this. These people don't sell their logs for $50 a hectare because they're using them. They're making a profit from their little tiny village, and they think that is a lot of money, but it really isn't, as we know. So, somewhere in all of this needs to be so much change in America and Western countries about how we buy things and how our products are labeled. And I don't know who will be the smart businessman that could do that. I was always hoping it might be Jeff Bezos, since he founded a company called the Amazon.
Yeah, but not.
Still him, it just because it needs to happen now. It needs to have some amazingly charismatic person come down and just say, you must tell us where this product came from, how much the energy footprint was to make it, and people would wake up. I don't think Americans purposely buy timber because they want to screw their grandchildren's lifestyle. I think they are very naive and not too smart sometimes.
Yeah, it is really about making those better choices.
This is the best chance right now because there are still some old growth places remaining, and we do have the capability of exposing the reality, connecting the dots, and showing why it matters to you. If you like to breathe, listen up.
Right. Good point.
But
oh, there you are.
Oh my gosh, there I am in Panama. I will say one thing about being in the canopy is you don't get leeches. on the forest floor in Australia or Asia. You don't get chiggers on the forest floor as I did here in Panama all the time. So I started wearing my Wellington boots, but
I'd say, yeah, those are brutal. They really hurt, but
I do. And you know what, to be honest, the rainforest I always say is safer than walking probably across the street in New York City late at night or some such thing. There are joys and not too many fears when I'm ever in the jungle, but you just, as a human being, have to always watch out for a few things now and then. And insects love to say, maybe taste us. And as we love to probably ruin their habitat sometimes. So we're fair game, I guess. But for the most part, I get more mosquito bites in Florida or Minnesota than I ever do down in Peru.
well, yeah, I mean, in an intact system, the mosquitoes have a lot of natural predators that are after them, and
Yeah,
birds and bats and
dragonflies,
frogs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But these are just these
I
amazing.
love this.
Yeah. So, I talk in my book, of course, a lot about the toolkit. And Sylvia, you probably have your own stories of developing the toolkit for undersea. And I sure came at a point in time as one of the world's first arbornauts to say, holy cow, how will we get up there? So my early method was making my own slingshot in Australia out of a piece of metal and sewing a harness out of seatbelt webbing. And then I realized that only one person could climb on a rope at a time to be safe. And I ended up helping an ecotourist lodge in Queensland to build the first canopy walkway like this. And they're fabulous for 100 people at a time or whatever you need to do work at night or during rain or do things that you can't do on ropes. So these are some of our tools that we developed along the way. This particular walkway is in the Peruvian Amazon. It's probably my favorite. And I think I've led 25 years of trips there for teachers, for students, for CEOs, anyone who would come and help count bugs. And it's very life-changing, for people to experience the Amazon in its pristine state as this place is. And in fact, this walkway at one point had 120 families, indigenous families employed. So I'm using that economic model now to try to build these canopy walkways in highly endangered forests because you need to find jobs for the local people.
Absolutely.
Ecotourism is a fantastic way to boost the economy and save the trees at the same time. And so we're really excited about that program called Mission Green, based on your project Mission Blue,
Yes.
Sylvia, where you have hope spots in the ocean and we have hot spots in the canopy. And this is one of our 10 hot spots, the Peruvian Amazon, where we've measured that the biodiversity is absolute at its max. And this walkway can hire people, especially women. It can fund students. It can bring income to the local people. And that's my hope, that I can leave in a small way a footprint of positive opportunity to save what I call the genetic libraries, because we can't save the whole Amazon. Unfortunately, we can't be everywhere at once. But if we can save the highest biodiversity patches for future genetic procreation, then we will at least leave the planet better off than having it totally destroyed, as is with your corals too.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of the living world. We're so good at killing things. We just have to get better at caring and
Yes,
understanding the value of the diversity of life.
absolutely. Yeah.
And sea.
There's a little tiny walkway. This is 10 minutes from me in Sarasota, Florida. It's in a state park, which was a first, because, they're like, oh my gosh, is it dangerous? And of course, it's much less dangerous than probably, opening the window in a skyscraper or something.
Getting in the car.
It's fabulous. 500,000 people visit it a year. It's bringing in about $30 million in income. So like the Amazon, it's another great example of how we can use the canopy to provide a conservation mechanism as well as a research tool. And lo and behold, most kids in Florida have never seen the view from anywhere above. There's no hills. So they get up in the tower that we built there and they say, holy cow, I can see forever. It's just wonderful when all the school field trips go on during the fall and kids get all excited.
Them forever. No matter what they turn out to be, they will have that perspective.
Yes, that's true too.
And that's so, and it's critically important in areas, not just in the Amazon, but in areas that are, highly developed, like Florida, where where you really do need to
Absolutely. And Florida subtropical forests are in big trouble because
oh yeah, so much is just, I get alerts nearly every day, now there's this area of Pinellas County that is just like the last of the oak, scrub oak forest,
right,
that's left there, and it's only, I don't know, it's like a less than 100 acres.
right.
And there's developers champing at the bit to turn it into
Right.
condominiums and to just,
And
come
in
through.
Florida, we have the economy, we have the engineering knowledge, the biological knowledge. It's one thing in the Amazon where people take advantage, I think, of indigenous people and say, I'd just like to take 20 trees and pay you $5, which is a dreadful thing. But, the people they don't have a library, they don't have a computer where they can look up what really is the right thing to do. But we know better in Florida
Absolutely.
on us. Mm,
Yeah.
It's just morally reprehensible.
mm.
And this is an amazing
Oh, neat.
looking space.
Yeah, this is a great one over in Malaysia. Fantastic. The Forest Service built this one actually near Kalimantan. It's a great educational opportunity, and it inspired another walkway we just built in Penang, a different part of Malaysia that is so beautiful and wonderful that it's now become a UNESCO World Heritage Area, which is so fantastic, meaning it's saved in perpetuity. And I want to give a shout out. That one was built by one corporate sponsor who wrote the big check,
Nice.
wanted a beautiful walkway, spare no expense. And he was local and his business was global. But I just think to myself, 10 corporate people could write one small check. It's probably, the cost of 10 Range Rovers or something with all the add-ons. And, we would have, these huge genetic libraries conserved overnight. So I'm just always hopeful that people who can make a difference would step up to the plate, because I know, Sylvia, in your years of fundraising, you've also been part of a world where, I love getting small donations from kids and all those things, but if we can get some of those folks that would write a big check quickly, we could really go to town and save things a little more effectively.
Yeah. It's just,
This
yeah,
is
it's the
the
same
time.
struggle between,
Mhm.
submersibles and canopy walkways. It's it's always a struggle, but so fundamentally changing, because you can give people that experience,
Yeah, if you,
that direct experience that, as you say, once they have been up there, they've seen that, or they've been down into the ocean and seen what's really at risk of being lost, they come
Yeah.
away fundamentally changed for the better.
it's about knowing.
Mhm,
Yeah.
truly.
Or if you don't know.
Yeah. And what about some of the engineering that goes into the creation of some of these?
And it's not as complex as people think. There are two main ways we build these. One is where we put a necklace around the tree. That one's a little trickier because the perimeter of the tree is the water hydraulics. It's very precious, and you have to put foam or some kind of rubber material to keep the stainless steel wires from getting into the tree and under the bark, but it's very doable in the tall trees. We just have to have a little more frequent maintenance of adjusting the necklaces. But the other way is, of course, using telephone poles, and as high as you can create a pole, you can make a walkway. But the underpinnings usually are stainless steel cables that are either affixed to a very small cement base, or in some cases are necklaced around a tree. And most of these big rainforest trees are incredibly tough timber because they've grown very slowly in the shade of the other mother trees. And they're not like pine plantations where you have really soft wood that could not have this. And they're lightweight, and they just provide this extraordinary opportunity, as long as they've been carefully placed to go through the canopy, not destroy the trees, but just go up
Right.
close and personal. I've seen walkways, especially in Costa Rica, I hate to say it because they've been built so quickly to make a profit, where you don't even get close to a leaf. And I'm
Oh,
thinking, it's kind of a fun little bridge to jump up and down on, but it doesn't give families that sense of wonder that you really need to, as you can see in this one, you're going really close to some of the branches, and you even lose the walkway at the far end in that beautiful tunnel of green, which makes it really, really fun. And probably monkeys are in there, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and some cool insects too, I'm sure, some
Yes.
Bats.
bats.
Yeah, totally.
Bats. Yeah.
Here you are.
Okay, here I am in my element, of course, and that's that same walkway in the Amazon where I'm coming across one of the longest bridges. And boy, have I spent hundreds of hours up there. This is the same place where Bob Ballard and I did the Jason Project, Sylvia, in
Yes.
1999, where we got to broadcast to some 3 million kids from here. Extraordinary and wonderful that in those days we had a big satellite dish. It cost millions of dollars to make that broadcast. 3 years ago, I took the Jason Project to Malaysia for $50,000, a laptop, a director, a sound person, and 20 local kids. And we had a Jason Project. And it just shows you that with technology, it's so much cheaper now and still
Yeah.
doable to
Right.
reach out to kids around the world from the treetops, which is great.
Yeah, it's one of
And from the bottom of the ocean. I mean, it's part of the reason for hope.
Yes,
You
it
know,
sure is. Yeah, it
that
really is
could not
great.
be done. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not that we didn't want to, we just
Yeah.
couldn't.
Another good girl story in this site, one of the things Bob did, which I loved, was we always competitively picked some local kids to work with us. And a fifth grader named Pamela Montero from the indigenous region became my field assistant for the 2 weeks. Of course, she'd never been in the canopy. She'd never been in her own jungle, really. And she was frightened to death. And she is just finishing her PhD at Gainesville in women's studies and conservation. And she's going to be my first employee for Mission Green to be the education director and
Okay.
go back to Peru and develop the education units that we'll use in the walkways around the world. So she's truly excited, but I can't imagine a better story than hers for how you can, touch these kids along the way. And I know you've done that yourself with dozens and dozens.
Oh yeah,
It's part of the joy
it really
of
is.
doing what we do.
I think I have 6 high school interns right now. So
Oh, you're so great.
and this
Oh my gosh. Live dangerously. I know my mother's watching this. Mom, turn it off.
yeah, it's like la la la. Yeah.
I love these inflatables. The French were really the pioneers of the radeau des cimes, or the first inflatable balloon, which was fabulous. And they took teams, international teams, which cost about $1 million. In the days of field biology in the 1980s, that was a fortune. For NASA, of course, it's nothing, but we used to have to really scramble to come up with those kinds of grants. But there I am on this amazing little luge or triangle and about to stop. The balloon would pause, and then we'd sample the top of the trees. We would kind of settle on it for a few minutes, which was super fun and really wonderful to do. And I also talk in my book about these expeditions where I was usually the only female. And in this case, when I first went on one of these hot air balloon expeditions, I applied as M. Lowman, so they wouldn't know that I was female. That was in the early 1990s, and I got in, and yes, I was the only female. And most of those French guys initially were horrified when I showed up at base camp in the middle of
that. Yeah.
But we did become eventually good climbing friends and colleagues for life. But those were the days when just women weren't supposed to be in this environment.
No, true in the ocean too, of course.
Yeah, and that is the actual balloon, and that's a big raft that we would use as kind of an aerial base camp, and we would go up there and spend the night and sample insects or leaves or all sorts of things. It was another eureka moment for me to find out that most insects feed on leaves at night. Well, guess why? Because they don't get eaten by birds as they would in the day. So it's just like, again, hit you over the head science, where I should have thought of that, but it took me about 2 years to figure out why wasn't I seeing any insects during the day? Oh, they were hiding and waiting to feed at night. So this kind of apparatus made it really great to do some sorts of sampling like that.
Well, the same is true in the migratory patterns of organisms in the so-called deep scattering layer, that they sink down into the deep by day because they get eaten up in that upper 100 meters or so. But by night, they come up close to the surface and they feed on the products of photosynthesis and zooplankton feeding frenzies up in the upper layer. So it's that vertical migration
Mhm.
for much the same reason you get the day-night
That is so great. Yeah. Neat.
shifts.
It's one of the, the real things to think about again as we see it coming into the more into the urban environment, the urban forests, is the impact that the light pollution has.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we're seeing so many of the insects that would normally come out at night, they come out now, and birds, because there's so much, especially the LED lighting, is so glaring, so bright that these birds can actually feed overnight. You'll even hear them up in the trees, still
Right.
stalking insects, and so they're not able to kind of complete their life cycle
It's disruptive.
just because of the
Wow.
disruption of introduced artificial light. And that happens in the ocean too. We see it with the squid
lights.
boats
Oh my
and
gosh.
Oh,
even
yeah.
resorts along the water that
Yeah, I
really,
don't think humans don't recognize they do things for their own good, but they sometimes forget about Mother Nature.
they truly do.
Ah, you have to explain this picture.
Liz, where did you take this one?
I think I took this one just over in San Francisco, but I just thought that the tall poppy story was so awesome. I had to include this.
I love it. Good old California poppy. Well, yes, chapter 6 in my book is the glass ceiling, or the glass canopy, I call it. But, I just had to think about that. I didn't want to have a book that was negative about a lot of things that happen to women, especially in science or in the career track. So I kind of focused in one chapter on the hurdles that I experienced. And my real hope there is that girls could learn from my misadventures, as I call them, because I think it's easy to say, oh, it's all better now, it's all equal. But you know what? Women still have the children. There are mostly male leadership at the conservation tables, which sometimes aren't going anywhere in terms of progress. And a lot of times I think women are still losing out at the workplace. So I just had my share of those experiences. In Australia, we called it the tall poppy syndrome, meaning if you rose above your male boss, you would probably get clipped back to be below his height. That was just our kind of colloquialism for what happened. And I think that most women in the workplace can probably relate to that. I have some wonderful friends who had fabulous male bosses, and I did myself. But those 20% or so that were really somehow not comfortable having successful women employees set us back. That just sets back a lot of the progress in science. And I sure hope we can educate our girls to do better.
Yeah,
And the boys too. Educate the boys that it's okay for
I'm the
girls.
mother of 2 boys, so with great
yeah, me too.
very interested in getting boys that they need to understand, and that will help their world too, to have great female colleagues. So go boys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just thought it was just so funny to the tall poppy syndrome, and then there's the vision of these guys with the mowers.
Truly, I know it's painful. And what's even worse in my generation, and maybe you too a little, Sylvia, we came to expect it. I was honored if I got asked to make the coffee or organize the food for the expedition. I thought I was being included, but not if I was, first author on a publication or a grant, which I sometimes deserve to be. It's so crazy that we settled for less in those days. And I do hope and think that those things will change.
They are changing, but
They
not
are
fast
changing.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And I had an article somewhere, I think it might have been the San Francisco Chronicle, when I was out at the Academy, and it said it will still take 170 years for women to have equal pay and equal promotions. And 3 times I put that behind the Xerox machine in a mostly male department, and 3 times it got pulled down.
Oh man.
So even the presence of the data, I guess, made some people uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yep. See, well, we do see that all the time, that people are uncomfortable with facts.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
me with the facts.
Yeah.
My mind is made up.
Yeah. But so I also wanted to talk about this real story of hope, and tell us about how these
Explain this picture.
yeah, explain the picture, how these shards of forests are protected and preserved, and what the outcome has been. I mean, is there some hope of reconnecting them?
Right, and that's one of my other case studies for Mission Green is an example of a country where the forests are so at risk, and sometimes we're not even aware of it. But this is Ethiopia, where in the northern half of the country, less than 3% of the native forests are left. And those remaining patches of forests are called church forests, not surprisingly, because they are the trees surrounding the churchyard. And the priests believe they are the stewards of all of God's creatures. And of course, I, as a biologist, believe I am responsible for the stewardship of biodiversity. So through a lot of amazing coincidence, mostly my mentoring one of the few conservation biology students in Ethiopia, I became a trusted colleague of the head of the Coptic or Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And together we pledged that we would save this genetic library. I mean, this is the only place where their native birds, animals, and plants actually live. The surrounds are subsistence agriculture, very extreme habitat, and yet no one there has access to Google Earth or a biology book in school, or obviously any kind of measurement tools that even map out the perimeter in any way. So when I shared these with the priests, thanks to the trust and friendship I had with my partner and the chief priest, all the priests together vowed to work with me, and we're building very simple stone walls. We help the farmers by pulling the stones out of the field, which they love. And we put the walls around the remaining forest so the cattle and sheep won't get in and eat the seedlings. The kids won't knock down the edge trees for mom's firewood, and the farmers won't plow too close. Simple solution. It's a conservation wall. It will hopefully create this genetic library for the future when Ethiopia has enough economy to afford to expand their forests again. But it is a very bleak reminder that this is the way we're going with the Amazon. This is the way we're going with forests in Florida. And of course, our blessed redwoods that lost something like 20% of their stands last year in fires. So Ethiopia is almost like a premonition of what could happen. And we're halfway through our goal right now of saving the 40 highest biodiversity forests. It's very disappointing because it's not expensive. We've raised 500,000 of the million required, and most of those donations have come from school kids who see these pictures and send their lunch money in, and it's so precious. You know, I just wish their dads were the CEOs of a company and could just write a bigger check, but we're getting there and we're hopeful.
Different.
Yeah.
On a different scale.
And National Geographic has funded several biodiversity teams that I've taken over there. And of course, we found all sorts of amazing things living in these canopies. So cross your fingers, because, you know, the kids in Ethiopia and the kids of the world have every reason to need the medicines and the insects and the pollinators found in these trees. They are part of our global heritage, and we need to keep them healthy and intact.
It's absolutely the case. We need we need all those insect pollinators, and we need the natural moisture that these trees attract and capture and get it back into the soil. And it's just that the entire cycle that needs protection and restoration.
So this picture is in your book.
Yes.
And the story is there. And I just hope the word gets out and that more people read what you've been up to. And
I hope so. I wrote it for that reason. I need to speak for the trees. They need a voice.
Yes, they do.
The tree huggers of the world.
Unite.
That's great. That's beautiful. Well, yes, and we need to hug the trees, but then we need to go back and save them.
Yes. And I love this picture of you in the.
Oh, thanks. Yep, there I am in my environment. You know, it's such a special place. And I do agree with you, Sylvia. The more people we can take there virtually or real is fantastic. And I am working now with a VR company on some different ways we can help everyone visit the canopy. And but I just hope and pray that more Americans will think about ecotourism in the canopy than they might for visiting some, you know, amusement park where most everything is plastic, because boy, would that ever help the world as well as their kids.
Yeah, definitely. Just, you know, eschew the plastic and get out there and enjoy the actual.
There's no substitute for the real thing.
Yeah.
Truly, truly.
The VR experience sounds like it could be a real, like,
Yeah.
another kind of a bridge that could be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah, we're really excited about putting webcams in VR for, again, even with ADA and all of these walkways, a lot of them can go out from a straight site where there's a valley or a gully, but in some cases, you need to think of other tools that give everybody access. And there are plenty. My mom has a walker, and I have plenty of friends with strollers, and we want to try to provide as much inclusivity as we can to visit Mother Nature.
Yeah, and we
Hear,
do the
hear.
same thing with the submersibles, trying to make them accessible to anybody, really.
Can't wait to have you down in the submarine and for us to come up in the treetops.
I hope so. That would be so great. Thank you, Sylvia. It's a date.
Okay. Double dates.
Yes.
Very good. We're
We
gonna,
have time for a few questions, I hope.
yes, we do.
You
We have
talked a lot,
time for a
didn't
few
you?
questions. So, yeah, you feel free to add your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get through as many as we can here. Victoria's asking, can any of your findings somehow be compared or applied to urban canopies and their importance to the cities, which are currently losing more and more of the green?
All the time. Fantastic. And yes, indeed, we need urban canopies. I was actually on the tree council for the city of San Francisco, which was maybe the most life-threatening thing I ever did, because people felt so strongly about saving trees, and another half felt so strongly about cutting the trees. It was quite an extraordinary political position to be in. But truly, we have a lot of good data now that shows the value of urban trees to the economics of the city, the shade, the housing for biodiversity, the opportunity to ameliorate water and other extremes of the climate in the urban area. So there is much, much data to show how important trees are in urban areas. There still are other data showing that the median age in an urban setting is about 9 years for a tree, because city engineers decide to widen a road and they come along and cut down all of the young plantings that neighbors or medians have established. And so there's this amazing and extraordinary sense that people can destroy those trees as quickly as they plant them. So we need stronger regulations to protect those trees in cities. And I think a lot more communication about the absolute gold mine that a tree represents to urban areas. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is that how the importance of focusing on planting of native trees in
Oh gosh,
urban
yeah.
areas.
Thanks
Because
for saying
I
that.
see that so many times. I've just watched in kind of horror at this little new park that's being built right adjacent to our shop in Alameda, and the trees of choice are ginkgo and jacaranda, which are
gosh.
beautiful trees in their environment, but they really don't belong along the waterfront
In Alameda.
in Alameda. It's just,
California is a great example of some mismanagement. Eucalypts, where I came from in Australia, eucalypt was our native species, and it requires fire for germination of the seed capsules. And so it has volatile oils, which encourage the fire to burn hotter and more widespread. And taking those and planting them near homes and in dry gullies is almost like putting oily rags in your attic and wondering,
right?
why in the heck is it burning? So we have done some silly things by planting non-natives. And of course, they don't house the same biodiversity that the natives do. And unfortunately, people got mesmerized by the fact that eucalypts grow fast, and they thought this is a quick fix to all of our other sins. And they've done the same thing, planting too many in Ethiopia right now, and the priests are on the prowl to cut down all the eucalypts because they watch the water table get depleted by these non-natives, whereas the native ones are very, very conservative in their use of water in a dry environment. So there are so many reasons why we need to stick to natives.
Yeah, and it supports the pollinators, and as you say, the soil biome and everything else that goes along with it.
And it really needs less long-term maintenance. The natives are adapted to your area, which is fantastic.
right,
Xeriscaping.
Well, yeah, and in most cities, they don't want to have to hire more people than necessary to do the tree maintenance and so forth. So the best way is to plant something that belongs there.
Yep, that's a very big trees and native trees. Those are the two take homes I would tell everybody. Save your big trees. And of course, if you're planting, plant natives.
Yeah.
And consider Florida, where casuarina has just taken
Oh,
over,
yeah.
and punk trees. I
Right.
mean,
Also Australian exports, I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
they don't have their native. I showed someone a picture of the casuarinas in Queensland and they couldn't believe it. They were these wimpy little things because they had all their native pests over there that it wouldn't allow them to grow that big.
Yeah. And okay, so Susan is saying that the church trees photo is so sad and disturbing. How about collecting the presents and helping collect all the churches with trees and have them unite together?
Well, and we're working on that. And it's, Susan, that's such a great ambition. What's devastating to me personally, because I've spent so much time in Ethiopia, is these places are destitute. They're very poor. The government does not support any of the trees in the churchyards or most native plantings for the most part. So the priests are living on pennies and their church is dependent on the locals to give money, of which they have next to none. They don't even have irrigation in their fields. They don't even have plows or tractors or anything. So we're looking at a culture that still needs economic improvement in order to do these good things. But the priests are now united to save their church forests. They recognize the importance of them. And that's where I come in, and all of us Westerners, by donating funds to build these walls, which is very cheap. We just transport the stone, build some gates, give a little donation to the church. But we need to make that happen because they don't have the money to do that themselves. So for relatively small funds, our dollars go a long way in a place like Ethiopia because they simply don't have money for conservation. They don't even have money for vaccinations or books in their schools at this point in time. So there's a lot of disparity in the world, even in the world of conservation, where some countries like Costa Rica and Panama are just inundated with American science and grants. But a place like Ethiopia, I can count on one hand the number of scientists that I know working there with any kind of funding. So, you know, we have our issues to work out to make the world of conservation a little more equitable.
Mhm.
one of the things I do admire also about what has happened in Ethiopia is it really puts the light on the ethics of caring.
Well, stewardship.
Yeah, beyond
Yeah, it's
the
just so
immediate
wonderful. Yeah,
so-called.
here are these guys with next to no income, and yet they don't go and cut their trees down and sell them. They know that they are responsible for all of God's creatures, which is so ethical and admirable.
It truly is.
treating life as something sacred,
Mhm.
and it should be especially evident in these old growth systems. I mean, it should be morally, if not legally, wrong. It is morally
Right,
wrong to take down
absolutely. Yeah,
1,000-year-old trees. It's just even a few hundred. It's just, how can we bring ourselves to destroy something that it's just for such selfish short-term purpose, and we just leave wreckage
right.
our wake.
And the big trees have all the wisdom. It's just like senior citizens, you know, they have all the biodiversity housed in their branches, whereas the small trees don't. And they have the root system that's down deep and secure. And the fact that we cut them down is no different, I guess, than burning all of our senior communities in Florida and saying, be done with it.
Burning down the library.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
that's true too. Or
Yeah.
burning art galleries. Yeah, it's crazy.
So we have an anonymous question. Is asking, what could we do instead of just expecting a corporation to write a big check? Is there some way that scientists could join forces and create a money-making corporation to pool that money back into conservation?
Right. So read the book. I will beg you to do that, number one, because in chapter 10, I do talk about that issue. And that's why I started Mission Green. And Mission Green is an economic blueprint to, if we can fundraise for these walkways, the villages take them over, the people, we train the people and they become the stewards. And that's the money making income producing opportunity that hopefully will stand through time to allow these projects to not require Mission Green to operate anymore, but simply jumpstart their genesis. So I'm very determined, like you are, that yes, we need a business plan for this to happen. And I'm hoping to use my science before I hit the grave to make that happen. As a canopy scientist, I have the wherewithal to build the walkways, the knowledge, that is, I have the connectivity to the local people and the scientific community. So there it is incumbent upon me to perhaps jumpstart this program the same way I think Sylvia feels that way in her senior years, to do the same thing with the undersea world. So it's putting all of us big trees or big corals to work, right? Sylvia's the big coral, and I guess I'm sort of a big tree. You've got to use
Yes,
it.
Highness.
Just for deepness.
So we are kind of at the little past the top of the hour. I noticed we had one person that has a raised hand. Are we game to take a raised hand question? Do you have time, Meg?
Sure.
Gigi, can we work on getting the raised hand person?
Brittany, you can ask your question.
You have to unmute. Well, maybe she's gone already. All right.
Well, Brittany, you can email it to
Yes, you
the
can email
program
the
and I'll
question.
answer it, I promise.
Yeah, you have to unmute. in
Yeah,
order
she would
to-
have to unmute to ask.
Yeah. Or
But
send it to my website and I promise I'll.
Nope. Wait, is she here now?
I think
Are
so.
you there, Brittany?
I mean, it was a similar question pertaining to the fundraiser that one of the anonymous persons had asked. How could, different scientists and persons along the same desire and passion, how can we contribute to the conservation and preservation of all these, natural
Right.
yeah.
Thanks so much for asking, Brittany. Now, I list 10 things in my book that citizens can do. Some people can donate, of course, to the Mission Green project, and that goes directly into creating these conservation libraries. I call them the walkways with their high biodiversity forests intact. There are other things you can do. You can share books with schools. You can make sure that your communities are saving big trees. You can get engaged in what we call citizen science activities, where maybe you even identify the big trees in your community and help your local governments put conservation easements on them. You can go to schools and make sure they have tree days or tree books. And it sure doesn't hurt to plant trees in schools. Kids just need to know that it doesn't excuse them from cutting down big trees to build the school, that we need to keep the big trees and then plant more trees along the way. So lots of things you can do. And last but not least, we talked earlier, but you can buy things like coffee grown in the shade of the forest instead of in the sun. You can make sure soy is not coming from Brazil and that your timber is not coming from cutting down the trees of Indonesia or Malaysia, things like that. There's an extraordinary amount of work we need to do with our consumption. So I hope you can read all these things in the last chapter and then maybe enjoy the first chapters as well. I have that first screen. But there you go, a plug for the book, but safety is the best.
Yeah, and and really taking care of water because it connects us all.
Oh yes, but one of the biggest things that I face here in my country, Trinidad and Tobago, as a Caribbean, we have an issue with quarrying. So it's not just about, degradation of the trees itself, deforestation, but the degradation of the soil, and
Correct.
it's way beyond. So it's not just about the big trees. It's now about the soil. It's about the core of our our ecosystems here now.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. In New Guinea is the same problem, in Australia a lot, where they're mining and they're degrading the topsoil, or they're looking for something under the soil. In fact, oil is also a big problem in the Amazon, as is gold mining, and it's devastating hundreds of hectares of forest. So we have to keep our, be really smart about these supply chains, as we call them, of where products are coming from and how they're affecting the landscape to be produced.
Yeah,
Exactly right.
Meg, I have one question, just a thought. In urban areas, where you get individual trees that are important in the community, how about giving them names? Like the redwoods in the forest have been, some of them at least are singled out with names.
It's a fabulous idea. Maybe I'll put a competition on our website and have people send pictures of trees with the name. I love that. I love that idea.
Every tree is an individual.
Right. Remember when Jane Goodall named her chimps and all the scientists poo-pooed her for that? But
Oh, yeah.
guess what? It helped her immensely to bring global attention to her organisms, which was so interesting.
But if
Yeah.
we do it for trees, you get to think like a tree. And
Right. Right.
But-
Okay. Well, I will expect Liz to send in me, you pick your favorite redwood in the backyard and send me a photo.
Yeah, yeah.
not numbers, names.
Not, yeah, names of them.
Great. Thank you, Sylvia. All ideas welcome. It's just amazing. You never know what hits the kind of public heart and mind at the same time.
About getting that spark going, and but people are much, I think, becoming much more aware. Asking cities not to put down so much pavement, particularly around trees, to give them space to get their roots down,
Breathe, yeah.
and to
Get
you know
water.
yeah, to get the water and to just be smarter with water and take care of it, because these canopies really do act as these natural filter systems to take the rainwater and replenish the groundwater, and make sure that we get cleaner water that's reaching the ocean, and not these sort of huge pulses of contaminated water with trash and everything in it that just courses across pavement or clear cut areas.
Absolutely.
It's a really important thing.
All good ideas. Wow.
But now we need one of these bridges that connects the rainforest down across through the mangroves, and then
Into the deep sea.
and then we'll have a submersible that'll take you just right down to the seagrass bed and the reef.
So ready.
Yeah,
So
let's
ready
do
to
it.
do it.
Well, thank you so much, Meg, and
Thank you
love the
both.
conversation today.
Such fun to talk to you, even though we have fairly daunting challenges, Sylvia and Liz. We have hope, don't we?
We all have hope, and we all have,
Action. Hope leading to action.
and I want to seed like all those tall poppies out there. Keep at it.
Good
And-
one. Right.
And thank you again. And before we go, I just want to say thank you to everyone who keeps tuning in, and to our producer, the Ocean Elders. We're really grateful to you for all of your support. And we'll be back again on December 16th, and we'll have our end of the year show with David Ptolemy, and we'll be talking about backyard national parks and how people can take this tree concept even further and do more with it. And
Right.
until then, remember,
Take care of the ocean, take care of nature as if,
your life depends on it.
because
It
it
does.
does.
It does. Water does connect us all. We're so grateful to everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks again. Bye.